Multiple people believed to be dead after a collision on a Melbourne freeway. Australia's COVID-19 rate of infection drops to a new low with only a handful of cases reported today. And game on, the NRL season given the green light to resume on May the 28th. Hello, welcome to ABC News. I'm Karina Carvalho. A senior doctor on board the Ruby Princess says she was surprised passengers were allowed to disembark in Sydney last month. The doctor is the first person to give evidence to the public inquiry which began today. The cruise liner has been given official orders to leave Australian waters by tomorrow night. It doesn't leave much time for chartered flights to be organised for hundreds of stranded crew members still wanting to get off the ship. Here's Mark Reddy.
Welcomed with a luxury hotel room, but not for long. Hours after settling in, 9 crew, including 2 Italians, were put back on a bus. Hold on. And under police escort, driven straight to the airport. Others got to stay the night, including Irish singer Giselle O'Meara, who tested positive for coronavirus while on the Ruby Princess.
We're finally on our way home, which is unbelievably exciting.
The repatriation continued in Port Kembla today, but it was slow, uncertain and at times confusing.
Please know we are working through all the necessary approvals to make this happen before the ship sails, but there are a number of challenges to overcome.
115 crew members from 9 countries were loaded onto buses. Some were dropped at hotels, others put straight onto planes. 21 of them are infected with COVID-19, forced to quarantine in hotels for 14 days. As more crew checked into hotels, a public inquiry began hearing evidence about the Ruby Princess debacle. One of the ship's doctors said there was no way of testing for coronavirus before the vessel docked in Sydney last month.
Because we could not analyse any samples.
But it goes without saying that you were not testing everybody on board, were you?
No.
Even though flu swabs were taken of some sick passengers, all were allowed to disembark at Circular Quay.
I was surprised that we were allowed to do that without waiting for the results to come through.
And the fact that there were still outstanding COVID-19 swabs for people on board, passengers on board that were unwell with flu-like symptoms, it was also a risk to allow those people to go out amongst the community.
I would agree with you.
With the ship given official orders to leave tomorrow, there's this warning from the Police Commissioner.
Everyone's had plenty of time to organise charter flights, including Carnival.
And some consulates, including the Philippines, are now scrambling to get stranded crew on flights before the ship finally heads home. Mark Reddy, ABC News, Sydney.
Multiple police officers are involved in a fatal collision on the Eastern Freeway at Kew in Melbourne's inner east. Reporter Amelia Terzon is there and joins me now. Amelia, what's happening at the scene?
Well, this is as close as I can get to this horrific crash behind me. Police have asked us to move away because the scene is so distressing down here. The ABC understands there's been multiple fatalities here tonight. Police say that officers are involved here in the scene. However, it's not confirmed if police are among those people that have died. What we've seen so far is that there's a large white semi-trailer and it's collided with several cars, and one of those cars in the last few hours we've seen was trapped underneath the semi-trailer. There's at least 20 fire trucks and crews with their sirens still blaring right now on scene trying to deal with this scene. We've seen fire trucks try and pull that car out from underneath that semi-trailer. But as I mentioned, it's a very dynamic and evolving situation. There's no traffic here on this highway at all. It's been closed for the last 2 hours, and we believe that this situation, this investigation behind me, could go on all night long.
So, Amelia, no plans to reopen the freeway anytime soon then as authorities continue to investigate what's happened?
That's correct. We believe this highway will be closed all night long. So as I mentioned, this Eastern Freeway is one of the biggest highways in Melbourne. Vic Road says that this investigation could take all night long, which means that this could impact morning traffic for morning commuters coming along this highway into the city. And the ABC has also spoken to eyewitnesses in the last hour that shed some light on what has happened here tonight. The eyewitnesses have told the ABC that just before this horror crash behind me, there was a Porsche that had been pulled over by police. The driver of that car was out of the car and the officers as well. So some details here starting to emerge, but the police commissioner, Graham Ashton, is due to come down here to this scene any moment now and shed some more light on what has happened here tonight.
OK, we'll try and endeavour to bring that to our viewers live. Amelia Terzon reporting there from Melbourne. The number of COVID-19 cases in Australia is continuing to fall, while the number of people who've recovered from the virus is on the way up. There have been just 8 new cases across the country today, though sadly 3 more deaths, all in New South Wales. New South Wales had its lowest number of cases in 6 weeks, though. Victoria and South Australia were the only other states with positive tests. On those raw numbers, it's possible Australia could eradicate the disease altogether. But as Sophie Scott explains, that isn't necessarily a goal the country wants to achieve.
Eliminating the virus might sound like a good idea, but it's simpler in theory than in practice.
If we did lock off our borders completely, absolutely no one was allowed in the country, then theoretically it would be possible.
So experts say suppressing the virus is more realistic.
The problem with using words like elimination and eradication is that we are a non-immune population. So you have to be so sure that you've got to that point that you would need to extend your restrictions for so long.
It means Australia would still have a small number of cases to manage. Let's take the Northern Territory, for example. There have been just 27 cases. 15 have recovered, leaving just 12 people with the illness. The Territory hasn't added any cases in more than a fortnight, so when those last patients recover, the Territory will have theoretically eradicated coronavirus. But short of closing the borders forever, eliminating or suppressing the virus doesn't necessarily mean life goes back to normal.
I don't see us shaking hands for the rest of this year. I think we can perhaps use other ways to greet people.
To be safe, some businesses may need to rethink how they operate.
People who have been working from home will continue to do so if they can, to minimise a congregation of people.
Let's not forget how quickly this virus can spread. On average, one person infects another 3 people. Those 3 can go on to infect another 9. 9 can infect 27. All of a sudden, 200 people have the disease, and we're back to where we were a few weeks ago. When restrictions do ease, contact tracing and testing will need to be scaled and outbreaks quarantined. Sophie Scott, ABC News.
For weeks now, thousands of temporary visa holders around the country have been out of work and struggling to make ends meet because of the COVID-19 shutdown. The Prime Minister has said temporary visa holders should just go home, but the Tasmanian Premier says in many cases they can't. So today, Peter Gutwein became the first Premier to act, unveiling a $3 million support package.
The past few weeks have been a big struggle for Ziem Duan.
Because of the coronavirus pandemic, I had been stood out from work, so I work over 30 hours, now down to 0 hours.
Ms Duam has been in Tasmania 7 months working in a restaurant. She's one of about 26,000 temporary visa holders in the state who could now be eligible for support from the Tasmanian government.
If a temporary visa holder can demonstrate genuine financial hardship, they'll be provided with an immediate payment of $250 and up to $1,000 for their family.
Any kind of support, even it's small, it's really mean a lot to us. So I've been so thankful for the news it's been announced today.
Non-government organisations will also be eligible for emergency relief funds that target temporary visa holders. The opposition says the federal government needs to chip in too.
This pandemic's going to go on for many months yet, and $250 just won't stretch that far.
In the northwest, many retailers are struggling to stay afloat after restrictions forced them to close. Debbie King's leather shop has been in the family for 65 years. They've weathered plenty of challenges, but nothing like COVID-19.
It's horrific. We're not taking much money at all. You get the occasional sale off Facebook, but that's all, so it's really devastating for us at the moment.
With cases in the northwest starting to trail off, Stage 4 retail restrictions could be relaxed on Sunday. Despite sales being down 90%, Mrs King's nervous about reopening.
I won't be prepared to open if it's not safe for me. Previously, before we shut down, I had to shut down before the government said, because people weren't adhering to my restrictions when they came into my business.
I think a cautious approach is what's required. We don't want to come out early and after 1 week have the virus spread again and go back into lockdown.
The decision hangs on how many new cases there are over the next few days.
Well, the 2-week time frame ends on Sunday. Whether they are lifted or not will be dependent upon the advice from Public Health.
There was just one case confirmed overnight, a 92-year-old man who was a patient in the Northwest Regional Hospital. He's now being treated at the Mersey. There have been no further confirmed cases at Northwest nursing homes. However, 5 people with minor symptoms were tested yesterday.
We need to keep surveillance for any illness amongst anyone linked to the Northwest Regional Hospital for a good week or so longer before I'll be completely heartened.
Public Health have a clear message. Anyone with symptoms should be tested. Only 70 people came forward yesterday in the Northwest.
We have to drag people out with runny noses, quite literally.
A mobile testing clinic has been set up in Smithton and will move to the West Coast later in the week. Anna Fromberg, ABC News.
Once hailed for its response to the coronavirus, Singapore is now dealing with a huge jump in cases after an outbreak among foreign workers who live in dormitories. You can see on this chart how the number of cases has accelerated and the country is now having its worst week of the pandemic so far. There was a record number of cases on Monday and more than 1,000 infections have been reported every day since then. Experts say the surge in cases shows what can happen if authorities become complacent. ABC correspondent Jake Stemmer reports.
Migrant workers underpin Singapore's construction industry, but their cramped living conditions mean highly infectious diseases like coronavirus can spread rapidly. Singapore seemed to have the virus under control, but it's been caught out.
No matter how well prepared you are, any blind spots, try and find them now.
Professor Dale Fisher and his colleagues have this week been inside the dormitories to test and treat workers. Physically distanced, these workers are being advised how to try to contain the outbreak.
The community engagement is going to be what's critical. You need to be able to tell people how to protect themselves.
Singapore's story shows how damaging one outbreak can be. While cases among these migrant workers have exploded, in the wider community, infection rates have fallen dramatically.
Things feel okay. We're still allowed to go out and exercise.
Lauren Hendrick Parsons is an Australian working in Singapore and isn't too worried about the outbreak.
There's been a sense of trust in that so long as we wear our masks, stay indoors, we're going to be okay together.
But authorities fear there's a hidden number of cases they don't know about because the number of untraceable infections hasn't come down, so the lockdown's been extended until June.
I hope you understand that this short-term pain is to stamp out the virus, protect the health and safety of our loved ones, and allow us to revive our economy.
A revival that will be watched for the world over, with many countries looking to avoid a similar sudden spike. Jake Sturmer, ABC News.
To breaking news and an update on that crash In Victoria, in Melbourne, the Victorian Police Union has confirmed 4 police officers have been killed in a crash on the Eastern Freeway in the Melbourne suburb of Kew. The Police Association Victoria has issued a statement saying it's shocked and immensely saddened by the deaths. The 4 were killed while protecting the community on the Eastern Freeway this afternoon. We're providing immediate and ongoing support to the colleagues and families of those members. This is a brutally sad reminder of the danger police face in the course of their service. Every minute of every shift, we mourn their loss, we grieve with their families and colleagues, and we will never forget them. So confirmation there that 4 police officers have been killed in that crash on the Eastern Freeway in Melbourne. Well, thousands of Americans have reportedly signed onto a class action lawsuit in the US state of Florida, which seeks compensation from the Chinese government for COVID-19 damages. The state of Missouri is also suing China for the role it played in the coronavirus pandemic. For more, I'm joined by Professor Natalie Klein from the UNSW Law School. Thank you so much for your time tonight. How will these legal suits play out?
Well, it's going to be a very difficult journey for those who have brought the cases against China, because at the first stage of the proceedings, there's going to be a question about whether China can actually be sued within US courts. And they're going to hit a fairly strong barrier by what's known as foreign sovereign immunity, which means that any foreign government cannot be sued within the national courts of a particular state. That's the rule in the US, it's the rule here in Australia. And they're going to have to work pretty hard to get around that.
Yeah, so China's under no legal requirement to respond?
No, they don't even have to show up for these cases, because the courts themselves will look at this particular issue and make a decision based on that.
And so is this merely then symbolic on the part of states like Missouri? You would think with class actions that people would think they'd actually get a result.
Well, yes, and I mean, I'm sure that the lawyers who are involved in the cases are going to work pretty hard to see if they can come up with some exception to foreign sovereign immunity. And perhaps they'll find a court that's, sympathetic to the idea and try and find some wriggle room around this issue. But I think that would be pretty hard. I mean, otherwise you're looking at, the US legislature has to change the law to be able to bring in a case against China.
What about the German newspaper Bild, which has charged Beijing hundreds of millions of dollars for damages inflicted on Germany as a result of the coronavirus outbreak? Again, would China be required to pay that money?
Well, no, I mean, they're not even going to a court at this particular point. So it's purely political. And at this point, maybe if they bring enough political pressure, China might agree to make a payment as compensation without actually admitting responsibility. That does happen in international practice. But it seems unlikely that China would agree to do that.
I wanted to ask you about Iran, because there were suits against Iran in the wake of 9/11. How did they play out?
Well, that's actually the interesting counterexample, because in that instance where you would think Iran would have foreign sovereign immunity, because Iran was classified as a state sponsoring terrorism, there was an exception made for immunity in that particular context. And there the US legislature did change the laws to enable the cases to be brought and also to be able to recover against Iran as well. And there were billions of dollars awarded against Iran, though Iran is now challenging those decisions of the US courts and the US legislature as violating their immunity.
So this might not be necessarily a legal question, but Australia is pushing for an independent international investigation into the outbreak in China. What kind of teeth would that international investigation have?
Yeah, look, I mean, an inquiry is a well-established form of dispute settlement in itself, because sometimes in trying to resolve disputes, just getting the facts right can make a difference in itself. And inquiry might be useful in terms of highlighting what went wrong and making sure that it doesn't happen again. And also there's that possibility that once you have an inquiry and the facts come out, that again puts a little bit of pressure perhaps on a state to make a payment. And sometimes it can be the first step towards setting up a bigger commission which might allow for mass claims. That has happened in the past, but usually you have to get the consent of the state involved to do that. So if China's not agreeable, it's not going to happen. At best, we're hopefully just going to find out what went wrong and how we can avoid going wrong again in the future.
Yeah, because the Prime Minister today has talked about giving the WHO weapons inspector-like powers so that they can go into a country without an invitation to investigate if an outbreak of any kind of virus occurs. Legally, is that possible?
Well, look, it's an interesting precedent to refer to because when that happened, those were Security Council decisions, I believe, that enabled the weapons inspection panel to go into Iraq at the time. But this time you've got a much bigger issue in as much that China is a permanent member of the Security Council. And that means that China can actually block any particular resolution that it doesn't like. So if it doesn't like that resolution, it can stop it going through. Iraq is not a permanent member of the Security Council, so it couldn't stop that regime from being in place.
Okay, so not much in the way of international recourse against China then, legally?
Not in terms of litigation. I think it's going to happen much more so in the political sphere. And really, I think the important thing is learning lessons about how the rules are not working very well in some instances and how we can make them better so it doesn't happen again.
Okay, Natalie Klein, fascinating to talk to you. Thanks so much.
All right, pleasure.
Human trials are about to begin in Britain on a coronavirus vaccine, and Australian researchers are playing a crucial role. But scientists caution we're still in the very early stages of finding a vaccine to prevent the spread of coronavirus. Bridget Brennan reports.
Under fire for its delayed response to COVID-19, the British government is now funding 2 multi-million-dollar vaccine trials.
This is uncertain science, but I'm certain that we will throw everything we've got at developing a vaccine.
Oxford University researchers will begin a safety trial on humans tomorrow.
We're also very interested to see whether or not it can prevent cases of coronavirus disease. And so that's why we need to get on and start the testing in humans.
Currently, there are more than 60 vaccines in development, with 20 countries working on trials. Australia is among them, along with scientists from Israel to Denmark, Canada to India. The vaccine being trialled in the UK passed its first hurdle at the CSIRO's Australian Animal Health Laboratory in Geelong.
The vaccine, when it was given to these ferrets, there were no adverse reactions to the vaccine, so we know that the vaccine is at least safe.
Australian researchers believe human trials will begin here this year.
These vaccines that are going into people now, there's still much more development in many more people before we're actually at the point that the vaccine is ready.
Normally, vaccine development takes years, not months.
It's right up there, top of the list in terms of urgency. So people have moved at absolute blinding speed, in my opinion.
In the long run, a coronavirus vaccine will also need to be affordable and widely available to the billions of people who need it. Bridget Brennan, ABC News.
Australia is taking advantage of record low oil prices to stockpile a national emergency supply of fuel. The decision has been announced as military tensions rise in a crucial maritime trading route where an Australian warship is training with the United States. Here's Defence correspondent Andrew Green.
On increasingly troubled waters, the US Navy's putting on a show of strength, joining Australian warship HMAS Parramatta for military exercises through the South China Sea. Since the coronavirus pandemic began, China's rapid military build-up in this disputed region has continued unabated, with Beijing fortifying artificial reefs and confronting other nations who claim the territory as their own.
To the Chinese, it's a big opportunity for them to stake their claims in South China Sea and make it theirs once and for all.
The strategic region's also vital for oil supplies. More than 30% of global trade in maritime crude makes its way through here. Now Australia's spending almost $100 million to create a national strategic reserve.
We are going to take advantage
of historically low fuel prices.
It's a very welcome first step after years of successive Australian governments saying that there was no problem.
Security experts have long been warning Australia needs to bolster national oil supplies in case of a major crisis. Well, that's arrived, and so has the idea of a reserve. But it won't be stored here, instead kept in the United States.
Having something in the United States doesn't provide for our national interest to be protected in the way that it should.
Now the hunt is on for local storage solutions. Andrew Green, ABC News, Canberra.
Germany has taken its first step back towards normality since implementing strict social distancing rules last month. It's a delicate balance between controlling the pandemic and addressing social and economic needs. Meanwhile, the country has just announced it has approved its first human trials for a vaccine. For more, I'm joined by Deutsche Welle correspondent William Glucroft in Berlin. William, first, can you tell us a little bit more about these vaccine trials?
Sure. This just came out not too long ago. The National Institute for Research that oversees these kinds of drug trials, vaccine trials, to make sure that they're up to national and international standards. They came out with a press release saying that indeed the first human trials here in Germany will proceed with about 200 test subjects, healthy test subjects. And it's the very first step here in Germany to try to find a vaccine to combat the virus. They, of course, first have to see if it works at all, and, of course, if it's safe. Germany joins 3 other countries, the UK, the US, and China, that so far have or are planning to have very soon human trials for vaccines. But, of course, researchers always emphasize this is just the first of a very long and uncertain path towards finding a vaccine. It can be a very difficult process to find a vaccine that works, that's safe, and that's reliable.
Germany has begun easing some social distancing measures. How is that panning out, and what will public health authorities be looking for as that takes place?
Yes, life went back a little bit to normal starting on Monday, but it's very different depending where you live in Germany. Germany is a federal system. That means it's up to the states to decide how to exactly implement the rules that they agreed on nationwide last week. In most places, small shops are open. But for example, in Berlin, what they've decided to do is even bigger shops. They're just limiting the floor space that people can access. So it's kind of a clever way around the size regulations. There's also the question of to mask or not to mask. Several states are implementing face mask regulations in public. But then there's the criticism of if you're going to be required to wear a mask, and the state has to be able to provide those masks. And that so far has not been the case. Although many states say they're trying to get some kind of mask, not necessarily medical or hospital-approved mask, but any kind of face covering to people. But they're saying any kind of covering is better than no covering when you're out in public, when you're on public transit, and that kind of thing. Schools are still supposed to be closed until May 4th. But again, here in Berlin, we have some students taking exams already this week and some schools opening up next week. So it really is a very diverse picture based on where you are in Germany. And of course, the big question is, how will this affect infection rates? That's something that the German government needs to evaluate every 2 weeks, which is what's thought to be the incubation period. So really, everyone's holding their breath. As Angela Merkel said, we don't want to take 1 step forward, 2 steps back. We want to preserve and build on the relative success that we've seen here in Germany so far.
Sure, restrictions are usually lifted in stages. So what are the next steps?
Well, the next steps, again, it will be state by state, despite whatever nationwide agreement there might be. Of course, we're looking at museums, we're looking at more schools, bigger shops, and of course, the big one is going to be cafes and restaurants that will remain shut for the foreseeable future. Of course, all of these rules are dependent upon maintaining social distancing standards, maintaining hygiene standards. For example, schools that are going to be allowed to reopen at the beginning of May, they can only reopen if they have a hygiene plan. They have to be able to guarantee that students are keeping a safe distance from each other. And also the big question right now is how to protect older people and other at-risk groups as society as a whole starts to open back up, if it starts to open back up. These at-risk groups are still very much in danger because while the infection might be able to be handled quite easily from healthy younger people, this is still something we have to watch out for older people. But then on the other hand, we can't just keep older people who might be living in old age homes cooped up, isolated in their places. there needs to be a balance found between keeping them safe from a public health perspective, but also keeping them safe psychologically and in terms of social interaction with their families and loved ones. So these are some of the challenges that Germany has to look at going forward, as many other countries do, but it's all going to really depend on the infection rate, which itself is very much dependent on people sticking to the rules and following the restrictions and the distancing rules that have been put in place by German officials.
William Glucroft, we're watching with interest from the other side of the world.
Thank you.
The top stories on ABC News. Victorian Police Union has confirmed 4 police officers have been killed in a crash on the Eastern Freeway in the Melbourne suburb of Kew. The collision involving a semi-trailer, a police car and multiple other vehicles has forced the closure of the Eastern Freeway in both directions. At least 20 emergency vehicles are on the scene, including fire trucks and ambulances. The New South Wales inquiry looking at the decision to allow nearly 3,000 passengers off the Ruby Princess has been told by the ship's senior doctor she would not have allowed them to disembark. More than 100 passengers had sore throats and some were awaiting COVID-19 test results when they disembarked in Sydney last month. The ship has become Australia's single biggest source of infections. The number of COVID-19 cases in Australia is continuing to fall, with just 10 new infections across the country today. Despite the good news, there have been 3 more deaths, all in New South Wales, taking the national toll to 74. The continuing slowdown in the rate of infection is leading local authorities to ease some restrictions. Next week, Bondi Beach will reopen, but authorities will be there to enforce physical distancing. And the NRL has been allowed to restart on May the 28th. Teams can resume training on May the 4th. ARL Commissioner Wayne Pearce says the premiership ladder will remain as it was when the competition was suspended last month, with all points carried over. Australia has set about building an international coalition in support of an early warning system to prevent another pandemic catastrophe. As political editor Andrew Probyn explains, Scott Morrison's idea is to give the World Health Organization or another body the equivalent powers of a weapons inspector to ensure critical medical data is shared.
Scott Morrison's idea is simple enough: to make sure that when there's another serious disease or viral outbreak, the world knows about it very quickly. That's not what happened with COVID-19. China's first case was in mid-November. Wuhan's wet markets believed to be the source. China didn't notify the World Health Organization until the end of December, and the WHO didn't declare a pandemic until March 11, a fortnight after Australia had done so. Valuable time was lost, almost 180,000 lives lost so far. The PM's proposal is to have international health inspectors with unfettered powers, a bit like UN weapons inspectors. He shared the idea with President Donald Trump this morning, as well as with the German and French leaders. Finding the mechanism will be the challenge. The WHO is considered unwieldy, and China's like.
Let's take you live now to Melbourne, where the Victorian Police Commissioner is speaking.
Officers who have lost their lives here on the Eastern Freeway tonight. It's a tragic night for their families. It's a tragic night for the police family more generally, and certainly this should be really a sad night for all Victorians in our community as we're grieving the loss of 4 police officers, 2 senior constables and 2 constables that have been killed here tonight in the execution of their duties. What I'll do is just talk a bit about what I can say about what's happened here at the scene. And then if there's any questions, I'll endeavour to answer those. But you need to be aware it's still very early in understanding what's occurred, and we're still in many ways piecing that together. But I'll certainly try and give you as much information as I think I can at the moment. So in terms of what's occurred, our best understanding at the moment is that at about 5:40 p.m. tonight, 2 members of Victoria Police who are doing road policing duties have intercepted a Porsche, a 911 Porsche, which had been travelling at speed, excessive speed, on the inbound lanes of the Eastern Freeway. And that vehicle intercept has occurred, and those members have stopped that vehicle in the left stopping lane of the freeway. and as part of doing that, they have made inquiries with the occupant of the vehicle. As a result of those inquiries, they've taken a decision to impound the vehicle based on the inquiries they were making. They've requested support from 2 further highway patrol officers who have then attended the scene in support. And once those officers have arrived at the scene, they've not long been at the scene to assist with all 4 police officers out of their vehicles with this particular person in terms of making those inquiries and conducting that vehicle impound. A large truck, a refrigerated truck, has then driven into these 4 police officers. The truck's also made considerable contact with the Porsche. The driver of the Porsche, we don't believe was injured, but has taken it upon himself to flee the scene on foot. We're still making inquiries as to his identity and his whereabouts, and forming part of our initial investigation as to who this person is and where he is. But he has decided to flee the scene, so at the moment he's been unable to assist us with the initial inquiries here at the scene. The driver of the truck has, for medical reasons, been taken to hospital for medical tests. It's not believed he has suffered injury in the accident, but has had some sort of a medical episode at the scene and has been taken to hospital for medical treatment. We intend for him to be there under police guard for some time. When it's possible for him to be interviewed, he will be interviewed. And that will include, at the moment, taking blood samples as well to test for the presence of alcohol or drugs in his system. But again, it's very early and too early to say at this stage, and we don't know at this stage what has caused him to drive that truck into our police members. So we're still forming that up in terms of why that has occurred. Here at the scene, we've got the homicide squad with primacy of the investigation because of what has occurred. Truck driver is in custody at the hospital. Major collision investigation unit are here as well in terms of making sure that the road policing aspects of this are dealt with in relation to the crime scene work. There's a very specialised work that Major Collision do, and they're getting on with that here at the scene as well. We have got the coroner here at the scene who is, as I speak, doing a walkthrough of the scene, which is the normal course of action at these type of events. And also we've got Professional Standards Command out here as well, just making sure that from that side of things everything is squared away in terms of making sure that this is all done with a full oversight, given the large-scale tragedy that's happened here from a point of view of all of our the loss of police life here tonight. As I said, this is a real tragedy, and so tonight time will be spent obviously notifying loved ones of our 4 officers, notifying broader families, and also trying to take care of the welfare of all the work colleagues and the many close work colleagues of our 4 officers that have lost their life here tonight. So a very tragic night indeed that we're having to respond to. I believe this is the largest single loss of lives in terms of police lives lost in one incident in the history of Victoria Police. I'm not aware of another occasion when we've lost 4 Victoria Police members in one incident such as this. So it's a very tragic night for Victoria Police, and again just highlights the dangers that go with doing police work, and the everyday nature of police work can sometimes seem mundane and then suddenly seem very tragic in terms of consequences. It's a timely reminder of the dangers of the work that police do every day, and our thoughts and prayers are with the families of our officers tonight, of those 4 officers that have lost their lives. We're planning on doing a more fulsome media conference tomorrow morning, where we'll hopefully have some more detail to share with you. As I say, it is early days here tonight at the scene, so it's very early stage of the investigation, so we really are just still piecing together exactly what's occurred here. I'm happy to deal with any questions at this point.
Can you define that medical episode?
No, I don't have the detail on it, but it was sufficient for him to require medical treatment immediately, so he's been conveyed to hospital for that purpose.
Did it happen before or after the accident?
That's what we don't know. In fact, we don't know what has, at this stage, caused this driver to drive this vehicle into our police members. We just don't know at this stage.
We saw that there was a car wedged underneath the truck. Can you confirm that's a police car, and also do we understand how that happened?
The vehicle that's under the truck is the Porsche.
And do we understand how the truck is driven into the Porsche?
Well, it's driven into the police officers and slammed into the vehicles as part of that collision.
How many other driver of the Porsche wanted for any other offences?
Again, we're making inquiries on that at the moment because we're still establishing his proper identity. And at the moment, we're trying to find him. And certainly, if he's watching this tonight, I'd strongly suggest he gets himself down to the nearest police station to present himself to assist with these inquiries.
Do we have any understanding of why he might have been pulled over by police to begin with?
Yeah, well, it's excessive speed on the freeway, and they were doing road policing duties. And as part of that, it detected him travelling at speed, and it's caused them to pull him over.
But you've said that they then wanted to impound the vehicle. Was there subsequent offences maybe?
Well, I'm not going to speculate at the moment. We've really got to find that out. You can certainly impound a vehicle for excessive speed. That's not unusual. Yep.
And so where were the police officers believed to be standing? On the open road, or exactly where?
We don't have that. That's what the crime scene is now working on, making sure that we understand where everything occurred. So I'd only be speculating if I told you that at the moment.
And in terms of where these officers are from, do you have any idea what station they're from?
Well, we're still doing some family notifications, so I don't want to be too specific. Obviously, we know who the officers are, but we don't want to be too specific at the moment because we're still notifying some families, and some of those people may well be watching this. So we want to make sure we've got all those family notifications done first.
Normally when police die, there's a police funeral, and obviously at the moment with coronavirus restrictions, we can't have those sorts of funerals. Can you detail to us how you will mark these funerals, and also how tough it will be to not have those big-scale funerals?
Well, if we're still in restrictions, which it looks like we will be, we won't be able to have those large-scale remembrance ceremonies and funerals that would we traditionally have to honour our police officers. But in the light of day, we'll have to sit down and plan that out and make sure that something appropriate happens. And then we have some appropriate remembrance that takes place, and even if something happens in the short term, we could certainly do something more fulsome when we are able to do that.
Of the victims, the two constables, how young were they? How long were they in the force?
I think one of the officers only very recently in the force, and the other officers were a little more seasoned in experience. One female officer, one female senior constable, and three other officers.
And any indication that the truck driver had an intent to?
Yeah, well, that's obviously the question that has to be answered as to what's occurred. It's one of the critical things here is to understand what's caused that truck to then plough into the officers in the vehicle. So this is obviously one of the major questions that we all want answers to, obviously, and to understand that it's a very important question that needs to be answered. And as soon as we can understand that, we'll certainly be sharing that with the community.
The two officers who were called by the original officers to stop the Porsche, were they in a separate? They arrived in a separate car?
Yeah, they were two up in a separate vehicle. It's normal practice when you impound to get another vehicle in and as part of that impoundment process. So that's a very normal thing that they've done.
The car, the Porsche was on the side of the road?
Yeah, the stopping lane.
And the officers are believed to be on the side, so is it believed that therefore the truck has veered off the road?
I'd only be speculating at this stage if I was to try to describe that to you. I might have some more in the morning on that for you, but certainly we'll be looking to understand that obviously in significant detail.
And obviously, you've said it's the largest scale death of police officers, something you've never seen before. How are you feeling, and how do you think those families are feeling?
Oh, well, I'm, as the police commissioner, you're deeply saddened by the events of tonight. It's a tragic night. It's a tragic night for Victoria Police. So you're deeply saddened. All the officers down here, I can tell you there's an eerie quiet down there that sometimes you don't see at crime scenes. It's an eerie quiet because everyone down there is feeling it at the moment. Everyone down there understands what a tragedy this is for the families of those officers. But it's a tragedy for the whole force, and they're all feeling that deeply over at the crime scene, down at that crime scene at the moment.
For the sorts of distress that was here tonight? I mean, being down here, as you mentioned, it was incredibly eerie. What sorts of counselling will people receive?
Yeah, well, at the moment we have quite a lot of resources these days now invested in that. So there's counselling that is going to be made available to everyone involved, particularly colleagues that work with these officers. They'll certainly be getting that psychological welfare and welfare support, both with professional welfare officers and professional psychologists, but also from their peers as well through our peer support program.
Do we have any more details on the truck driver?
No, only that he is still in custody at hospital under medical treatment, and that's as much as I have on him at the moment.
No age or anything for him, or a description of the driver of the Porsche?
Yeah, that's what we're just piecing together. As soon as we get that, if we don't have him in custody, we'll be putting that out, obviously, because we want to get hold of him as soon as we can.
Do we believe he's from Melbourne, or the driver of the Porsche?
I don't know the answer to that at this stage, to be specific with you. Sorry?
Is the car registered to Victoria?
Not at liberty at this stage to give you that information.
And what about the truck driver? Is it registered to Victoria? Where's he from?
I believe it's from a chicken poultry business, which is a commercial business here in Melbourne.
Last question. Homicide squad involved. Can you explain what the investigation includes?
Well, in these type of events, obviously we have to do an investigation as to criminality, and we've had 4 tragic deaths here tonight, and the officers, those officers concerned, have been the victim of a crime, and so the officers, the homicide squad, will have primacy of that. But these are very specialised investigations that occur in the road policing area, so Major Collision Investigation Squad are supporting that with their crime scene expertise. All right, thank you very much for coming out, and so it is a very tragic night, and certainly one that we'll do our best to provide answers on as soon as we can. Thank you.
That's Victoria Police Chief Commissioner Graham Ashton addressing the media after that crash in Kew in Melbourne's east. He said the 4 deaths is the largest single incident of lives lost for Victoria Police in its history. 2 senior constables and 2 constables were killed. At about 5:40 this afternoon, 2 members of Victoria Police intercepted a 911 Porsche which was travelling at excessive speed. They've stopped the vehicle on the Eastern Freeway and taken the decision to impound the car. They've called for support and 2 other officers arrived. So there were 4 police officers with the driver of the car when a large refrigerated truck has driven into the 4 officers and hit the Porsche. The driver of the Porsche was outside the car and was not hit. He fled on foot. The driver of the truck was taken to hospital after a medical episode. He's under police guard, where officers are taking blood samples to test for alcohol or drugs. Graham Ashton saying that it's not known what caused the driver of the truck to hit the police officers, whether that medical episode occurred before or after the collision. The homicide squad is leading the investigation, and the coroner is being given a tour of the scene as well. He said it's a large-scale tragedy. They're taking the time to notify family and taking care of work colleagues. Graham Ashton says he's deeply saddened by the events of tonight, and there's an eerie quiet at the crime scene amongst the officers there. He said they will be offered support to all the police officers who have been affected, and Victoria Police will give another update on the situation in the morning. Kids Helpline has expanded by launching a second counselling centre in Sydney this week to help support children and young people. Demand for the counselling service has increased dramatically this year because of bushfires and the pandemic. Tracy Adams is the Chief Executive of Your Town, which runs Kids Helpline. She says demand has risen by 1/3 since February.
For us, it's about getting as many counsellors involved as we possibly can, and the new centre coming online this week is totally about that. More counsellors being able to provide more responses. We've also tried to ensure that young people are getting information from the Kids Helpline website, so updating that regularly with tips, info sheets, and then allowing them to use those self-help resources for themselves, for their friends. But of course, our counsellors are available 24/7.
What are the main concerns from children when it comes to COVID-19?
Well, at the moment, for younger children, it's very much focused on family relationships. They care about what's happening to their family. Firstly, it was really about health and well-being, and now we're seeing children really worried about the economic impact. Perhaps their parents are less work, struggling with what that's going to mean for the future. For the older young people, the young adults, it's very much about how it's impacting their lives and their mental health and their well-being. They too are seeing challenges, loss of employment, loss of connection to friends. All of this is really meaning that they need help now, and we're really aiming to do that with the launch of the new centre.
And what support can Kids Helpline offer you? We're talking about some of the online services, but is it really the phone line that most children use to access your services?
Well, increasingly it's becoming our web chat service. So Kids Helpline is always going to be available on the phone, but young people are really electing to use our online service, so web chat. We've had a huge surge in that. So young people phone, email, web chat, and social platforms, but we're really seeing that young people are really embracing the online environment.
Is there an opportunity here in terms of building resilience in the younger generation?
I think so. In fact, many young people have great resilience. They cope with change. They cope with a lot of challenge. We have young people dealing with really serious issues in their lives, child protection related issues, domestic violence. They seek help. They should be applauded for doing that. They're really showing that they want to help themselves, that they need these strategies, and connecting with counsellors is a means of being able to be resilient.
And what if the children that contact your services need further help? We know we've been hearing about people being reluctant to access GPs or go and seek out other medical services because of the fear around coronavirus and its ability to spread.
Well, that's a great thing about Kids Helpline. It's always been an online service, and young people can connect back to that same counsellor if they need to in an ongoing way. Because our counsellors are paid professional staff, they're here on an ongoing basis, and many young people connect with counsellors that might go on for years, even though they're being supported face to face. Because Kids Helpline is 24/7, it's a real safety net for the lives of children and young people.
A pair of Tasmanian inventions are in the running for a funding of up to $3 million through a national incubator program. The continuous positive airway pressure machine was developed by Professor Peter Carvalho at the Royal Hobart Hospital. It helps premature and sick babies breathe properly through a specially fitted mask.
This is a system that has continuous real-time feedback and makes it much easier for nursing staff, much safer and much more effective for babies who are critically ill.
The second invention is a portable mobile phone steriliser for healthcare workers. Phones are known to be covered in as much bacteria as 10 toilet seats.
Well, you simply put your phone into the device and take it out, and it cleans it on its way.
If successful, the Tasmanian concepts will be turned into prototypes. A Queensland artist is making sure veterans can mark Anzac Day despite physical distancing restrictions. Her local town is embracing a project that's transforming mundane infrastructure into creative tributes to fallen soldiers. Anna Hartley reports.
It might seem simple, but to veteran Les Allen, this painting is a stroke of genius.
This is awesome.
Coronavirus means the returned serviceman can't march on April 25th, but he will be able to honour his fallen comrades by laying a wreath below this artwork outside his house, honouring the Anzacs.
I can remember coming home from Vietnam and giving the leave pass and told to nick off. That was a welcome home. We need this recognition, and this is a good way of showing it.
It's the brainchild of Kim Brulger-Williams. When her paid exhibitions were cancelled due to COVID-19, the renowned Indigenous artist decided to make the power pole in front of her own home her new canvas, creating designs to pay homage to the Anzacs.
Within our own family, we've had family go to war. We've lost family in war. To me, it's important to honour our vets. They did something for us. We're here today because of them.
Next, her neighbours wanted one, and word quickly spread through the small town of Beaudesert, south of Brisbane, which boasts a strong military history.
It's about just giving back to them. You know, I haven't forgotten them, and I don't think anyone else should forget about them. You know, it's not our fault there's a virus here. Dad, I'm going to cry.
The local RSL sub-branch is helping to fund the project, so Miss Williams can paint poles in front of more veterans' homes.
But we've felt that it was a wonderful thing to do, especially this year when we won't be able to have any commemorations officially.
Kim Williams will try to paint as many light poles as possible before Anzac Day. With public memorials cancelled, the people of this community will join others across Australia and stand in their driveways at dawn to honour all of those who've served. Anna Hartley, ABC News, Beaudesert.
Okay, let's recap what's taken place this hour. We've had confirmation that 4 police officers have died in a horror crash on the Eastern Freeway in Kew in Melbourne. Those 4 police officers had been responding to a speeding vehicle, a Porsche 911, which they had pulled over and called in support when a white, large refrigerated truck hit the Porsche and hit the 4 police officers, killing all 4 of them. The driver of the Porsche, who had been pulled over, fled on foot. Police are appealing for him to come forward. The driver of the truck has been taken to hospital after suffering a medical episode. He's under police guard. Police are unsure whether he suffered that episode before or after the truck hit those police officers. Victorian Police Chief Graham Ashton expressing his deep sorrow and the tragedy that's taken place, saying it is the largest single incident of lives lost for Vic Police in its history. We'll have more. Stay with us on ABC News.